This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel, broadcasting remotely. Can you guess what we're talking about today? Not Kanye. Fashion. This headline in The Atlantic made me laugh. After the pandemic, the office dress code should never come back. Are fancy sweatpants here for good? So what are fancy sweatpants? I don't own any fancy sweatpants. Do you? Today, Where We Live, we're lightening it up and focusing on fashion in the era of Rona. Maybe there's some good things to come out of the last several months. Comfort? Flexibility? We want to hear from you. What are you wearing these days? You can join us, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can also share a comment on our Facebook page and Twitter at Where We Live. Our first guest on the show today on Zoom, Givhan, senior critic-at-large at the Washington Post, writing about politics, race, and the arts. She's also a longtime fashion writer. Robin, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
We heard from a lot of listeners on Twitter the other day, Robin, when we posed the question about what they're wearing these days. Deb wrote, nice top, earrings, necklace, leggings, and fuzzy socks. Fuzzy socks are a must. Robert tweeted, sweatpants, t-shirt, flannel shirt, slippers, hoodie as needed. And I love this one. Sabrina writes, high school sweatpants, college hoodie, and an afterglow, knowing that sweatpants and hoodies are still acceptable as an adult. So, Robin, I got to ask, I've never asked a guest on my show this before, but what are you wearing?
Well, I just came from a workout, so I actually am wearing a sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants.
Fancy sweatpants?
They're not terribly fancy, but I will say that I absolutely plan on changing into what I will describe as proper clothes.
So have you been working from home these last several months?
I have. I've been working from home since March.
And so what are proper clothes these days versus when you went into the office?
Well, I joked with one of my colleagues that I was refraining from wearing leggings and track pants all day. And I was at least putting on a pair of, blue jeans or a pair of trousers with a waistband, because I said, working from home and so close to my refrigerator, I need proper trousers to keep me honest. Sweatpants will lie to you about what you've been up to.
I love it. So when we think about the last several months, Robin, I mentioned that you were a longtime fashion writer. How has this pandemic changed the way we're dressing now? Not everybody can be working from home, but many of us are.
Well, I think for people who are working from home, it's just given them a freedom to put comfort before everything. I think that the place where they're really dressing up is above the waist, when they have to get on a video conference with their office or with coworkers. But it really has sort of unleashed the desire for ultimate comfort. But that said, I've also talked to and interviewed people who don't want to just kind of blur the line between home and work, between playtime, play clothes, and business clothes. And so even if they're not putting on, a full suit and, a skirt or heels or something like that, they're still sort of making an effort to, quote unquote, dress a little bit in a more polished manner when they're sitting down at work.
That's a really interesting point. This idea that if you wear business clothes or you dress more formally for work, when you get home, you can just take that all off, get comfortable, and it's almost as if you're putting a barrier between your work and home life. But it seems like these days there's no barrier. It's just we're going from working and we're dealing with home stuff, and it's just not a good situation to be in for many of us, Robin.
Yeah, and I had a chance to speak to, people who have returned to the office, if not full-time, just for a few days a week. And what I found, I thought, was really quite interesting and kind of speaks to the conundrum that the fashion industry itself is in, which is that there were some people who were really eager to, pull out those clothes from the back of their closet and wear them again. I spoke to a woman who is a lawyer and also a magistrate judge, who said that she really looked forward to being able to return, to put on her work clothes again and put on a pair of heels, if only for a few hours, because she missed that. And, a realtor who said that even though he doesn't have to wear a suit when he goes into the office, he still does, because it sort of preps his mind for, for the day ahead, and it puts him in the right mindset. So, and then of course there were others who sort of relished not having to be so formal, but still, did not wear the same sort of super relaxed sweatpants to the office. Maybe they wore just a pair of, comfortable trousers and a sweater.
Ricky tweeted, comfy pants all the time if I'm not leaving the house, and big, ugly socks. Business on top, party on the bottom for Zoom. I don't even know how to answer, especially after... I don't even know how to respond to that, but thanks, Ricky, for sharing that with us. We're in this pandemic, and so many of us wearing masks like we should, but has that now become a fashion statement, Robin?
Yeah, a little bit, for sure. I think people are trying to make the best of a terrible situation, and, make the wearing of masks not quite so painful. And so we've seen, for instance, Dr. Jill Biden wearing a mask that matched her dress. I absolutely have seen an incredible rise in just sort of the quality, the diversity, the price point of masks that are available out there, fabric, reusable masks. I've seen sequined masks. Obviously there have been masks that have been created to make a social point, a political point, but just from the standpoint of aesthetics, I always say that fashion finds a way. And if it's something that people are wearing, people always find a way to personalize it and to allow themselves to stand out.
You can join our conversation as we talk about our new dress code in this pandemic. My guest today on Zoom, Robin Givhan, a senior critic-at-large at the Washington Post. You can join us 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. What about the beauty industry, Robin? I was telling my producers that it's been months since I've had to buy lipstick, and that was a normal thing for me to wear lipstick every day. And even my kids will respond. Early on in the pandemic, I wasn't wearing lipstick. So I'm just wondering how the beauty industry has responded with, I would imagine, sales being low, at least with lipstick.
Well, interestingly, during the most intense period of the lockdown, the areas that saw sales growth included hair care, because obviously a lot of people were missing being able to go to a professional salon. And also things like skincare and self-care, so to speak. But beauty influencers have gone to YouTube and have been focused on helping people create a look that's sort of above the nose. So it's been really focused on the eyes and mascara and eyeshadow, things like that. Certainly, back to skincare. There's been an interest in that because of what's been dubbed maskne, the tendency to break out when you're wearing a mask all day and perhaps getting a little bit sweaty. But I do think that, the era of sort of the virtual cocktail parties and things like that, people, will put on lipstick for that as their sort of sole nod to, okay, I'm dressed up now for the party. So they put on the lipstick.
I've also been known to leave the house and putting lipstick on and then putting my mask on, because sometimes it can be a habit, because we're not going to be wearing our mask, say, in the car, and you never know who you're going to see in the neighborhood. Yeah, and this is where we live as we're talking about what we wear and how it has changed as many of us work from home. Robin Givhan with us. And joining us now is Lisa Frydenlund, a knowledge advisor at SHRM. This is the Global HR Professional Association. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So I don't want to treat you differently, Lisa. What are you wearing?
Oh, goodness. Okay, so because I'm in California and it's a wee bit early right now, I'm
Oh,
still
no.
in my very appropriate pajamas, if I'm being honest.
So once it is technically the workday for you, Lisa,
Yes.
how has your dress code changed in the last few months?
Well, sadly, because I am very much about presentation and I do love to dress, I have scaled down. I do have my regular outfits that do include sweatpants, I will say, but I also throw in a pair of palazzo pants and even sometimes a pair of overalls, sweat overalls that I found. So I also dress in layers just because I like to stay warm. So I try to dress it up a little bit, maybe with a poncho or something like that. But the comfort level is definitely more so now than it used to be.
Mm. When we think about dress codes, I mean, when did they really become the standard in our society?
Well, it's interesting. I was reading an article just the other day about when business casual became a thing, and it was back in 1992, it said. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it was that long ago. And I remember being in the HR profession at that point and thinking, what does this mean now? And I think it was Business Casual Friday is when I remember it really becoming a big deal. I think that that's when employers started really looking at, oh, how do we address this dress code now that we've got this business casual thing going on? And so I think it really became more and more because trying to balance out what is appropriate, what our client base wants to see, what still makes it doable at work, and still, quote, be professional, so to speak.
It's interesting the idea of what is being professional. I was thinking about like our workforce today. So much of the workforce are people in the millennial generation, and so have they been the ones that have kind of changed our idea of what the workplace should look like? Maybe when you're dressing more like yourself, like maybe that means more than having what quote unquote the professional look. Lisa, what do you think?
Well, interestingly enough, because I do have a son in that category, and he just went in for a new job, and he was asking his mom, "Is this okay to wear?" And he was trying to dress in that more professional versus the "let me be me." But it was he added in the flavor of who he was as well. So I think it gives us the opportunity to maybe sprinkle in a little bit more about how to bring yourself to work, but still take into consideration where you work, what the current, what your dress code is, as well as, who you are working or engaging with. So my thought is that we've added a little bit more to what may be available to us or, what may have been way back then.
When we think about business casual today, what does that mean? So, a nice shirt, but jeans?
Well, jeans and possibly if they're more tailored, then no, I don't ever see the opportunity for what is it, the slashed and holy jeans as being an option. More so the slacks or a casual like what is it, the flowy dresses type of thing, that you see more like in the summertime. So again, just more of a less no tie type of thing, or jackets. Those have kind of been, put to the wayside.
Robin, what do you think when we think about business casual and then where we might be going in 2021 once hopefully this pandemic's behind us? So what will it look like in the workplace?
Well, I think it, certainly will depend on the workplace. I mean, I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I don't think that the look of Capitol Hill is going to really change that much. Although we are seeing because particularly Congress is becoming so much more diverse, there is a much wider array of styles and just sort of aesthetic dispositions. But just not exactly in defense of sweatpants, but just to sort of expand the definition of them. I think people have to recognize that, the old idea of sort of slouchy, cotton droopy sweatpants, really they exist, but the way that so many of them look now, I mean, they're really much more tailored, they're much more polished. They come in beautiful fabrics from cashmere to silk, and you can, and they're not cheap. I mean, they range in prices from, sort of a mass market merchant all the way up to a Tom Ford, and suede sweatpants. So, you can really still have that comfort, and still also have a sense of luxury as well. But I do think that it's likely that we'll see tailoring loosen up a little bit. For a long time, I mean, I remember writing a story about how men's trousers were getting tighter and tighter and tighter because their suits were shrinking. And that was very much, sort of the silhouette. And I think we'll definitely see that start to loosen up somewhat.
We heard from more listeners on Twitter. David writes, we've all seen the built-in mask turtleneck. That is the extreme. I have not seen that, but that sounds pretty extreme. And then he writes, athleisure is the new normal, and wearing a button-up with joggers is the new golf polo and chinos. What do you think, Lisa?
Oh my. So I haven't seen the mask turtleneck either, but I know my mom would love that she loves turtlenecks. It's interesting. I'm still working from home, and I do know that when I get back into the office, I do definitely want to be able to go back to kind of that more dressed up. It's interesting, as you made mention about working in DC, I work across the street from our capital here in Sacramento, and I've noticed that the dress code has not changed. It is still a very formal, the suits and the ties and the skirts and even I think hosiery. So I am encouraged that we have this desire to be more comfortable as we dress, and I'm hoping that continues forward, appropriately so, as we go back into the workforce or workplace, so that people can be more comfortable if that's the way. And I think, will productivity be enhanced possibly by more comfort in the workplace? That's my hope.
That's an interesting idea. And I was also thinking about when we think about more serious issues in the workplace, like discrimination, and how a dress code may play into that. What are your thoughts on that, Lisa?
Yes, absolutely. It is one thing that, for example, just with the protests that we've had, as well as even just wearing masks, these bring up new elements for HR professionals and employers to think about. And so I think being able to have the conversations around, what does this mean now? How do we address it? Can we challenge what the current or prior dress codes have been, so that we can be more aware, understanding, and hopefully more reflective about what we do going forward?
Robin, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would mention recently an incoming Congresswoman, Cori Bush, had tweeted that she was sort of overwhelmed by the cost of creating a wardrobe that was, quote unquote, sort of appropriate for Congress. And, one of the points that she raised was that it was very difficult to be, a working class person going to Congress. Alessandra Ocasio-Cortez mentioned this as well, just how expensive it is. And I think with a loosened dress code, with a dress code that isn't so focused on, strictly tailored clothing, which is more expensive, I think it really does sort of help change the dynamic in the halls of Congress. And if not opening them up to more people, just making it a slightly less stressful for those who, come from a blue collar black background.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. Robin Givhan with a senior critic at large at the Washington Post. Lisa Frydenlund was also here, knowledge advisor at SHRM. This is a global HR professional association. Lisa, before we let you get back, hopefully, to some sleep, waking up so early from California, what are some of the questions you're getting from other HR professionals, the way their companies are thinking about policies moving forward?
Interestingly enough, and I'm thankful for it, I have not had any questions about what do I do about somebody who's not, aside from the fact of somebody doesn't want to wear a mask. Or they can't wear a mask. And so it's a discussion around how to accommodate that concern. Other than that, I think what I will probably see is once more and more folks are back in the workplace, how do we look to enhancing our dress code policy? How do we bring back folks who have been working from home and integrate them back into that new, do we want to have the same dress code? Can we bring in the more casual? So I'm hopeful that we have a new outlook on it. I look for the silver lining in all the darkness that's happened over the course, and hopefully will bring more comfort to the world.
Lisa, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Again, this is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We'll continue talking about fashion after the break, including how the industry has adapted to consumer needs in the pandemic. How have your clothing and buying habits changed in the last several months? We want to hear from you. You can join us, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Fast Company writes, over the last 6 months, COVID-19 has pummeled the $2.5 trillion global fashion industry. With nowhere to go and unemployment on the rise, consumers have lost interest in buying clothes and shoes. Does that describe you? What are you wearing these days? You can join us, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Again, we heard from a listener on Twitter. One writes, I've decided Wednesday is dress up day, so I pull stuff out of the, quote, office clothes section of the closet on Wednesday. Still no makeup, though. I hear you. Robin Givhan's with the senior critic at large at the Washington Post. There's also the view the pandemic could reset the fashion industry for the better, including making decisions that are better for the planet. Robin, talk us through some of the themes and trends that you're hearing in the fashion world about just thinking about our social environmental commitments that companies might be taking now.
Sure. When I would say probably starting in March, April, the industry really started having a bit of an existential crisis. Everything had shut down, and for years, people in the industry had been complaining about the sheer volume of clothing that was being produced, the speed at which newness had to come into the marketplace, the kind of stress that was putting on designers, on their staff, on the planet. And they really thought that this was an opportunity to sort of change the way that the industry operated, because there was this sort of artificial pause. And there was a lot of conversation about just producing less product, having fewer sort of seasonal drops in stores, stopping that kind of fashion circus that had people going from one city to another city, looking at runway shows and creating these enormous carbon footprints. And I think all of those things were really topics that needed to be considered, as well as the issue of inclusivity. But I think with many things, it's a huge issue. Some ideas are starting to move forward. I'm definitely seeing some brands just producing smaller collections. Carolina Herrera talking about how they normally would have maybe 900 pieces in a collection and pretty much having that. Other companies are thinking of more digital ways to show their collections and work with buyers. But then there are still larger brands like Chanel or Dior who have really sort of basically returned to form and really want to do have the same sort of system up and running, because a lot of jobs depend on having that system up and running. So I think there's a real tension. I do think that the possibility of change, though, is there, and that's a good thing.
You know, I'd ask the question to listeners about if they're even going shopping these days. And when we think about consumer confidence and how that impacts demand, are we seeing these brands thinking about making less expensive clothes?
It really depends on the brand. You know, for those that are really in the luxury sector, for them, you know, their customers are continuing to shop. And many of them, you know, there have been cases where perhaps they've bought less, but they have bought more expensive items. You know, the online retailer Moda Operandi mentioned that one of their top sellers was something like a $7,000 lavishly embroidered Miu Miu miniskirt. So they're buying things that are special to them and things that they might keep in their closet almost as heirlooms. On the other hand, you know, I was speaking to the president of Shopify, which is one of the largest retail platforms, and they've seen their business, you know, grow up some 200% since the pandemic began. And that's because a lot of medium and large and small businesses that had brick and mortar stores are taking their business online and reaching out to customers wherever they may be. So I'm not sure that prices are going down, but I do think retailers are reaching out to customers wherever they can find them in new ways.
I wanted to bring into the discussion now Kathleen Grevers, Director of Education for Fashion Revolution USA. This is an NGO working to educate and engage consumers about who makes our clothes. Kathleen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lucy. Thanks for having me.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this pandemic has, even before the pandemic, people have been thinking about sustainability. I know we did a show before about fast fashion and the consequences. And so I'm wondering, as we're in this pandemic now, I've lost count which month of that we're in. But when we think about how consumers, how companies are thinking about ways our clothes are made and sourced, tell us about what you're hearing.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I love Robin's quote when she said, "Fashion finds a way," and I do think it does find a way. And I think that what we're seeing is people are slowing down, and we had this roadblock, right, of our normal consumer behavior, and we've been able to step back for a minute and take a look into our closets and take a look to what we have, and knowing that maybe the need to go and find this, you know, one shirt in a matter of 5 minutes that you usually have to go shopping wasn't available. So we really had to take inventory. And I think that's a lot of what we're trying to express within Fashion Revolution's manifesto of slow down and, you know, understand where your clothes are coming from and also understand what you already have.
So much of our lives are online now. And so given what you just shared with us, Kathleen, how are consumers thinking about when it's time to buy something? You know, what's a responsible way to do it?
That's a great question. I think that, you know, what we try to offer is the idea that every piece of clothing that you touch, somebody else's hands had touched also. And to have that respect of, okay, somebody made this. This wasn't a machine just sewing this. So whatever store you go into, there's somebody behind that clothing that you're looking at. So I think just a mind shift of somebody made this clothing, and then to kind of think about, all right, if someone made a clothing, where was it made? How were those workers treated? And it depends on your own, you know, ability to take in this information and where you are. So I think step by step you can evolve how you purchase and where you purchase and have that thought process.
Do you see your designers taking more steps to become more sustainable, or is there greenwashing? Can you explain that term?
That's a great one. So yeah, Robin, I think you're laughing too.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, there is greenwashing because, and I say this even to the students that I teach, I say, if you're producing something, you're adding more to what we have in the environment, period. So is any clothing produced sustainable? No, you can't put another item on the shelf and call it sustainable. It's not possible. So that's the biggest greenwashing there. And it's not to say that everyone's going to stop buying clothing. It's not going to happen. But just to understand that, the FTC Green Guide is one that I also teach from. And it talks about all the different marketing aspects of greenwashing. And that guide hasn't been updated since 2012. So we have a lot of work to do in having the consumer be more educated in what their clothing is. Is it organic? What does organic mean? Is it, eco-friendly? What does that mean? So I think that we do have a lot of work to do within the terminology of what greenwashing is. And we have, these steps to take, that the education of students coming through design schools. And I think that has gotten, honestly, that's the silver lining in my aspect of COVID, is that when the students all had to mobilize home, they went through a lot of, emotional conflict, but they also had to resource exactly what they had in their homes at that time. So some students didn't have sewing machines and, all the materials that they had available at arm's reach in their studios of their schools, they now had to resource. And I think even that mind shift for students, they've come out with amazing collections, and they are beautifully made. And it's almost that the competition of being in a studio with another student slowed down. So their thought process on what they're making slowed down. And I love that aspect. So I think designers are looking, in a way to kind of have this understanding of, first of all, your clothes need to be made to last. And the design, the materials, the story behind the making of the clothes, that needs to come out deeper. So I think those are the aspects that's happening with designers from my perspective.
Robin Givhan, again, senior critic at large at the Washington Post. What's your take? I know you covered what New York Fashion Week was in September and how designers have had to change and adapt. How do you respond to what Kathleen shared?
I agree with it all. I think part of the issue is that a lot of the terms that people use, whether it's eco-friendly, sustainable, environmentally friendly, they don't really have, I haven't heard a clear definition, a standard definition for them. And so a lot of companies use those terms and they don't really have very much meaning. And what I've also found is that whenever I've tried to report on the issue of sustainability, it feels a little bit like just plummeting down a rabbit hole. Because, as soon as you start talking about, organic fabrics, then you start asking, well, is it better to use an organic cotton that comes, that's locally sourced, or is it better to use one, that comes from a conventional cotton that, has better labor practices? You're constantly sort of weighing all of these different aspects. And I think most consumers just want to shop as easily as possible. They don't want to have to think through a moral conundrum in order to buy, a pair of trousers. So it really is incumbent, I think, on the industry to make these kinds of changes. But I also think that, customers really have to break themselves of the habit of just wanting to buy more. and being willing to buy less and perhaps pay a little bit more for what they're buying. One of the nice things that I think has come out of everything that the industry has been going through is, for instance, when fabrics became more challenging to source from, mills thousands of miles away, you saw designers deciding to use fabric, remnants that they already had to produce collections. And no, they couldn't produce as much, but then each of those pieces became that much more special, and they were, using fabric that already existed.
Again, with us as well is Kathleen Grevers, Director of Education for Fashion Revolution USA. What about secondhand clothes? Is that something that people are still interested, even though when we think about the pandemic, people are always thinking about wanting things that are clean and sterile, and there might be this impression maybe secondhand isn't a good idea?
Yeah, I think I think that's a good point, because we, one of the events that we do during Fashion Revolution Week, which is in April, in solidarity with what happened in Rana Plaza, which is a large clothing factory that collapsed. And one of the things we do during this week of honoring what happened in Rana Plaza is we do all these events, and one of the events is a clothing swap. So we have student ambassadors from all different college campuses from all over our nation, as well as all the other countries that are also part of Fashion Revolution. And the clothing swaps were canceled because we didn't know how the virus was spread, and we wanted to contain it. But I think that secondhand stores are still on the uprise. I think that online secondhand, like ThredUp, has been very popular, and especially when there was a business partnership with them and Rent the Runway. And I think that even, locally with people not wanting to go into stores, they're swapping clothes with neighbors a little bit more. So I think that secondhand and, the swapping idea is still working. And I think it's still going to continue to grow, because people also want to be able to tell the story of, hey, my neighbor gave me this shirt and, I love it. Or I found this amazing Dior dress on ThredUp or Poshmark and, got it for this amount of money. And so I think that whole idea is still strong.
I love that idea of neighbors swapping clothes. That's a great idea. As long as you get along with your neighbors. Robin, we got a tweet from Christine that writes, she's a former DC resident. She's followed you for years. She conducts professional credibility training, and she says image is still important, even on Zoom, especially when your audience does not know you. And I think that's an important point to stress. But I have to go back to what this means for the fashion industry. We know a lot of people and sectors are hurting financially. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, what companies are the ones that are going to be okay in the middle of next year versus ones that unfortunately won't be able to keep going?
Yeah, it's hard to know, because a lot of these companies are private, and you don't really have a clear sense of how well financed they are. But in general, I would say that the larger corporately owned brands, the big prestige luxury houses, I think will be fine. In part, that's because their market is so broad, but also because, most of them are quite vertical in that, they own their own production, they own their own outlets. And so they're in much greater control of their destiny. I think the smaller brands may, in some ways, be fairly well positioned because they are nimble and because they can much more easily reinvent themselves and typically have a much stronger relationship with their customers. The ones that sort of worry me are those sort of mid-sized brands, the ones that often are very much at the mercy of department stores. And when department stores are pressed, the people who feel the pain first tend to be their vendors. And so those are the ones that I think will have the greatest struggles, because they're, to use a cliche, they're not too big to fail, and they're not small enough that they can very easily be propped up with a modest cash loan. But I think one thing that can be helpful, though, is the way that people responded to the struggles in the restaurant world and in the food industry. I think they did so because there was a real sense of connection to neighborhood restaurants or places that were special. And I think if the fashion industry does better at creating those kinds of connections, I think that their customers might feel a greater sense of urgency in wanting to support smaller and local brands.
Robin Givhan, again, senior critic at large at the Washington Post. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. I also want to thank Kathleen Grevers, Director of Education for Fashion Revolution USA. Kathleen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Coming up after the break, did you ever watch Say Yes to the Dress? Getting a wedding dress can be a big deal, but how are future brides dealing with restrictions in the pandemic? We talked to a Connecticut boutique owner after the break. You can join us too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We're doing a show on gratitude next week. Despite this being a chaotic and hard year, we want to know what you're thankful for this year. You can send us a note or a voice memo at wherewelive@ctpublic.org. You can call us and leave a message, 860-275-7221, and we may feature you on the show. That's next Tuesday. Now, how are some sectors of the fashion industry doing, like wedding dress boutiques? Joining us now on Zoom, Megan Dumaine, owner of Wedding Embassy in Watertown, Connecticut. Megan, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I understand you've worked in the wedding industry for, more than 15 years. And tell us about when you opened up your bridal shop in Connecticut. How was business?
So I opened up my bridal shop in 2006, and it was a very small business then and right before the recession. And so I really didn't get up and going in a financially positive way until after the 2008 recession. And so from that point on, it's moved nicely and it's been really successful, and we've grown, which is great. But we started at a time that was also a little tumultuous. So this time feels a little like that time.
Yeah, it's been quite the year. It's hard to be a small business owner. So tell us what it was like to deal with COVID in the spring and all the restrictions. How did you still help customers find the wedding dress of their dreams?
Yeah, so we, like most of the other shops in Connecticut, shut down for about 2 months. So it was a time where we had to make adjustments really quickly and figure out how we were still going to service our existing customers, find a way to get to new customers, because we didn't know how we were going to come out of this, if people were still going to get married, if we were going to be postponing a lot of things. So a lot of shops across the state made changes in the way that they sold to brides. So some shops went into online sales and did virtual appointments, which consisted of maybe trying on dresses over Zoom for their customers to see in real life, I say with air quotes, so that they could better understand the fit and purchase something online. Other shops like ourselves, we did a little bit of virtual shopping, but we also just spent those 2 months reaching out to our customers, checking in with people who have purchased. And we really focused on making sure our existing brides were comfortable and knew that we were going to be here for them moving forward. So we focused a little bit more on the people that we already had a relationship with and had a sale with, versus really spending time seeking out new sales.
And given the restrictions, like finding ways that women could try on dresses safely.
Yeah, we were lucky enough. There's another shop in Connecticut called the White Dress by the Shore, and the owner of that shop, Beth Chapman, was wonderful advocating for shops to continue to be able to let their brides try on dresses once we reopened. Even now, regular retail isn't allowing people to try on. And with our stores, that's the biggest draw. You know, you're there to try on and to experience wedding gown shopping. And so,
Now,
go ahead.
we know that people have still been able to have weddings, maybe not the wedding that they always dreamed of, but smaller weddings. And I understand you even have bridal masks.
We do. You have to be ready for every circumstance. So our seamstresses have been really wonderful. And so they've been creating masks out of the remnants of everyone's dresses so that they can be fashionable and match while getting married in a COVID ceremony, whether it's small or a little bit larger.
Now, we just have a couple minutes left, but when I think about people looking to the future, when you think about your business and what people are looking to buy in the future, what does it look like for you?
That we're a moderately priced store, and while we're a small business, I would say in Connecticut we're a medium-sized boutique, and so we're seeing that people are excited to get back into the shop and to shop, but we're seeing that budgets are a little bit lower. People are a little bit more hesitant to purchase just because plans are still up in the air for 2021. So we're assuming once things, maybe a vaccine gets out there and moving, that people will be excited to get back into having large weddings. But I do think there's going to be a little restraint in budget and maybe a little bit more thoughtfulness when purchasing. Maybe the dress will be flexible for a ceremony inside or outside. Maybe it'll be okay for a backyard and a ballroom. So I think people are just trying to get as much flexibility as they can out of their purchase.
I liked what you told our producer, Tess, that even anniversary parties, people want to get a dress to celebrate when we can.
Yeah. A lot of people, they're having their mini ceremony now in a backyard with close friends and family. But then that 1-year anniversary party, that is going to be the knockout party, so the dress is being saved for those more exciting events down the road.
Here's hoping for a better 2021. Megan Dumaine, thank you so much, owner of Wedding Embassy in Watertown, Connecticut. We're glad that you're finding a way through this pandemic, and we hope to talk with you again when we're done.
Yes, thank you.
Today's show was produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to talk about the last fluent speaker of the Mohegan language, flying bird Fidelia Fielding. She preserved her linguistic heritage in diaries. Those diaries are back with the Mohegan Nation. We'll talk about that tomorrow. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. As always, thanks for listening.